more people are dying on battlefields, being forced from their homes, or in need of life-saving aid than in recent memory. Despite our efforts and various international mechanisms, the pursuit of peace is failing. Indeed, it seems to be no longer about maintaining peace, but about preventing the worst. Now, distinguished delegates, the preponderance of containment strategies and the shaping of alliances motivated by competing visions are redrawing the contours of our regional order. It is cultivating an attitude of utter abandonment of values of inclusivity, empathy, and compassion, compounding the likelihood of entirely eclipsing the already disrupted peace and prosperity, not just in the Asia-Pacific, but for our global society. Constant discussions and speculation on choosing sides is not only counterproductive, but will only add to the brewing cauldron of mistrust and suspicion. Of late, Malaysia has been perceived as tilting to one side in a so-called strategic pivot from the other side. This is not only an oversimplification, but a gross misperception of national interests and character. The truth is, Malaysia was, is, and will be on the side of Malaysia. We are fiercely independent. That is to say, we refuse to be defined by how major powers see the world, and Malaysia will continue to strive for our national and strategic interests on our own terms. Malaysia stands for peace and progress, fellow feeling, and above all, abiding adherence to international law and cooperation. In this vein, Malaysia maintains a strong and fruitful relationship with both China and the United States. At the same time, Malaysia will continue to pursue productive and meaningful relations with our other partners, whether they be our long-standing strategic and comprehensive strategic partners or friends in the global south. Malaysia has a proud history of being part of the non-aligned movement during the Cold War. In remaining faithful to the principle of non-alignment, we have proven that the pursuit of dynamic neutrality is not only feasible, but highly desirable. Speaking of the United States and China, I would be remiss if I did not mention that we mark respective milestones with both countries this year. 10 years ago, Malaysia and the United States upgraded our bilateral relationship into a strategic partnership. I've often reiterated the importance and value of US-based foreign direct investment into Malaysia, especially in high-tech sectors. The functionality of the relationship is a testament to the enduring nature of our ties. This year too, Malaysia celebrates the 50th anniversary of ties with China, our largest trading partner, a key investor and a close bilateral and multilateral partner. The progress that China has made in the past decade, especially the vast improvement in the quality of life of hundreds of millions of its people, is nothing short of spectacular. I look forward to a visit of my colleague, Premier Lee Chiang, to Kuala Lumpur in the next few weeks, or fortnight to be precise. While maintaining the balance between our relationship with key partners, it is an important part of Malaysia's approach to the world. There are situations that call for unhesitating and unequivocal intervention. I'm speaking here of war crimes, of flagrant atrocities committed in the killing fields under the pretext of self-defense or settler colonialism, which is nothing short of a systematic campaign of genocide to displace an entire population of indigenous population. Now, the Israeli occupation of Palestine is a scourge on our collective histories in the conduct with nations. The Palestinians live oppressed and besieged while we are alive and free, limited in our influence and power, but sovereign and free. Malaysia is no major power, make no mistake. But we will use our freedom to support the Palestinians' fight for theirs. The humanitarian crisis we see today is not an abstract disaster. We cannot stand idly and allow this to be yet another chapter of mass killings and displacement that furnishes the historical volume of atrocities that have been committed, recognized, and then tragically but conveniently ignored. We have consistently voiced our concerns about the reluctance of the United States and the West to apply pressure on Israel. However, it's important to acknowledge positive developments. Within the constraints of the US political system in the election year, President Joe Biden has recently expressed growing impatience with his Israeli counterpart. He has also begun to push for an acceptance of a proposal for a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. We welcome these early signs of change in America's approach towards the conflict. We hope that the United States will keep re-evaluating its approach and hasten an end to the killings and carnage. I've been often asked by friends in Europe, in the States, and recently Japan, the Japanese Prime Minister, because of my personal engagement with Hamas leaders. I've informed him and colleagues, and may I reiterate the point, that the engagement is consistent to secure peace, to suggest that they accept the initiative by the Arab League and colleagues, the OIC and the international community. And I am pleased to say that in my last meeting with them, in my recent communications, they seem to be more amenable to accepting these proposals for an amicable resolution, permanent ceasefire, and accept a two-state solution. Not such in implicit terms, but by accepting the Arab League formulations. We are still waiting for the response by Israel, because the belligerence and the bombings continue. Ladies and gentlemen, the divergence between the global north and global south are no longer about development, but rather distinctly ideological, experiential, and perpetual. Opposing perspectives in geopolitics, global threats and challenges have created deep-seated friction between the two poles. In this interregnum, we no longer agree to disagree. Instead, we disagree, we can contradict, and we clash. These differences have transformed the global south from a mere term to one that defines the developing world, molding it into a strategic configuration of growing significance. The global south now represents not just the pursuit of prosperity, but the driver of an emerging global prosperity and growth. In the battle for inclusion, it represents the reclaiming of a voice not to be ignored in the international order. We see a reflection of this in the urgent call for restructuring the United Nations. Malaysia is steadfast in its view that a comprehensive reform and expansion of the United Nations Security Council is necessary and must ensure equitable and fair regional representation to reflect current realities. While the shortcomings of the United Nations will be our collective albatross to carry, the time is now to push for an inclusion and acknowledgement of diverse strategic contexts around the world. Indeed, there is precedence. Just last year, we witnessed the inclusion of the African Union into the G20, pointing to greater global South mobilization to come in a trajectory of transformation at a pace as yet unprecedented. We are cognizant of how global South narratives today have introspective and empowered undertones which resonate deeply with Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, 9 years into our community, ASEAN is in a position of strength to embrace the future with confidence and vigor. In the political realm, ASEAN has served the region well, being the primary forum for dialogue, diffusing disputes between countries, and ensuring regional stability. At the same time, as the region's default convening hub for diplomacy, ASEAN has become an indispensable part of adjusting to regional institutional fluxes. In the economic realm, ASEAN has emerged as a dynamic and rapidly evolving economic hub, resilient in the face of daunting challenges. Favorable demographics, industrialization, and urbanization trends, and technological advances, and now with energy transition, digital transformation, we will increasingly see ASEAN as an economic powerhouse by 2040. In these times of great uncertainty, it is imperative to redouble our efforts within ASEAN towards strengthening ASEAN to be the key platform for managing regional affairs. We need to move from mere rhetoric to concrete action and focus on seeking ways to deliver on its aspirations. It must start with addressing the underutilization of ASEAN's mechanisms. ASEAN Regional Forum, the ASEAN Plus meetings, and the East Asia Summit, which has been celebrated for its convening power in the past, but now appear to plod along by fact of existence. It should also be anchored on the fact that ASEAN's future development evolves alongside its member states, their national interests, and what we can collectively achieve together. Now, as Malaysia prepares for the chair in 2025, we will strive to lead with moral character, as stressed upon the principles of Malaysia Madani and the General ASEAN Consensus. This entails a civil and inclusive approach that celebrates interconnectivity. In upholding the enduring principles of non-alignment and cooperation, the Madani ideals demonstrate that it is possible to act respectfully while being an active player in shaping our region. Indeed, for Malaysia, ASEAN is more than a pillar of our foreign policy. It's also a force multiplier, a valuable asset to exercise our agency. Now, a difficult challenge we must contend is with the crisis in Myanmar, given the scale, displacement, and fighting, the scale of death, displacement, and fighting. The message ASEAN should convey must come from a unified voice. The 5-point consensus. Failure to act when there is ample cause to believe that a member state is violating the spirit of the ASEAN Charter is a dereliction of our moral duty. Of course, ASEAN can only facilitate any efforts when the various parties in Myanmar are ready to do so. But this does not mean that we should not try multi-pronged and more creative tracks. And under President Jokowi's initiative last year, we even gave this understanding that member states with somewhat better relations and opportunity to engage should continue to engage. Establish a trio, Indonesia, Laos, and Malaysia, to continue a more aggressive engagement within that 5-point consensus agreed upon by ASEAN leaders. Among the various stakeholders in Myanmar, there are the nascent beginnings of a long and difficult conversations of what the future of their country will look like. This includes the possibility of a federation-like system. While it is not our place to decide what is best for the people of Myanmar, it is incumbent on us, friends and neighbors, to help facilitate what and where we can. As a friend and brother, it is in this spirit which I reiterate that Malaysia consistently calls for an end to an ongoing violence, an end to the history of political marginalization against all the peoples of Myanmar, and the adherence to the 5-point consensus which was jointly reached in Jakarta in 2021. We will work with other ASEAN member states and dialogue partners who have influence on Myanmar to push for peace, more effective humanitarian mechanisms, and the eventual political engagement of all relevant stakeholders in that country. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the challenges we are confronted with are indeed formidable and wouldn't be easy to overcome. And I wouldn't dial back on the apprehension of the dire consequences should we choose to ignore the writing on the wall. Yet the challenges are not insurmountable. Inasmuch it is crucial to remind ourselves that Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific is a region that remains resilient despite it all. Our realism as we approach these challenges and prospective solutions should not be steeped in pessimism. As a collective, we have the opportunity and, more importantly, the responsibility to seek solutions that can mitigate the risk of conflict while guiding us to a prosperous, sustainable, and just future. The discussions that you have had and will have in this Asia-Pacific Roundtable can be part of these efforts. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yang Amat Prime Minister. Well, we can see hands already being raised. I have not even said anything yet, which is a very encouraging sign. Just a couple of immediate caveats. We are very, very strict on two things. Number one is that when you actually call upon to raise your question, please identify yourself. And that's all there is to it. Ask the question. We don't need any, public relations announcements of what you do and all that other thing. I don't mind telling you, I can be pretty rude. I will just cut you off if you tend to go astray. Yeah. So with that in mind, I don't need to introduce you the fact that the Prime Minister is a veteran when it comes to answering questions. So make sure that the questions don't fall back on you and will really help to elucidate and enlighten the situation here. So on that note, let me see some raise of hands. Wow. Okay. Perhaps we'll start with right in front. Victor.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Prime Minister. You mentioned the importance of China-Malaysian trade. May I propose that the next priority should also include cooperation in science and technology, including in the space program. And China-Malaysia space cooperation will not only be with Malaysia, but through Malaysia with ASEAN as a whole, and through Malaysia and Indonesia with the Muslim world at large. There are many details I can report and share with Your Excellency, but on this occasion, may I sincerely request Your Excellency's full support for such space cooperation, especially in
okay,
light
sorry,
of the
Victor,
fact.
I think your time is up.
Thank you.
The question is clear, thank you.
Thank you. Of course, the relationship is comprehensive, strategic partnership, which covers all fields. Digital, as I mentioned, energy, research, even maritime cooperation, although we confine it to our territorial waters, not to be deemed to be provocative to any other powers. Even in the area of space science, there has been discussions. They have provided for some training facilities, and we'll continue to explore this. I'm looking forward to the visit of Premier Lee Chiang, because that will be a great opportunity to enhance, or as the Americans say, the enhance the bilateral relations.
That's good. So that was from the center. Perhaps now it's fair to go to the left. Rick, is it?
Yes.
Is that, okay, perhaps Rick. Yes.
Thank you very much. And I'm Rick Smith, a retired Australian government official, working hard to keep my hand in this region and greatly welcoming the opportunity to attend my 8th APR. Greatly enhanced, Prime Minister, by your presence. Thank you.
Sorry, Rick, you might want to re-articulate your question. It's not very clear.
My question, Prime Minister, with great thanks to you for what you've said, is that you have signalled, as many others have in this conference, that we are at the end of an era, a political era that has changed, a world that's evolving differently. We've addressed much of the political implication of that, a multipolar world and so on. But in particular, I'd like to ask, sir, how do you see the economic order evolving? Bretton Woods, moribund, the liberal trade agenda of the 80s, 90s, early noughties has passed us by, the WTO under stress. Where do we go from here in reshaping the world economic order?
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. Yes.
I'm impressed because please don't consider me as a great thinker. I'm a pragmatic person being assigned to try and manage this country. Your question is, number one, whether it is deemed to be an end of an era. Certainly so. I am a firm believer that present period is actually dealing with the post-normal times. Now, post-normal times would include having to accept the fact that it is chaotic, it is complex, it's full of contradictions. Change is at a pace which is unprecedented, and all these issues that we talk about, trade, climate, civil wars, all the political, economic, social problems happening simultaneously, that we term simultaneity. Now, if you accept that notion, that means there must be a preparedness to chart on a new agenda. The obsolete ways of thinking must end. If it is in politics, I say, other than craving for power, it's about humanity and compassion, which unfortunately we lack these days. That's why with higher education, with more sophistication, there's a growing racism, religious bigotry, hatred, and enmity, which runs contrary to the whole idea of knowledge as wisdom. Now, in terms of, and this would certainly permeate into a systemic issue, is the financial infrastructure of the world just, or do we need to make the necessary adjustments? Look at the problem caused in this region by the power of the dollar. which runs contrary to all economic fundamentals. A country may have a low inflation, high growth, high investments, low unemployment, and yet having to struggle with its currency. This is the problem that we had. I can understand if it's badly managed, endemic corruption, and high inflation, high unemployment, then there will be an onslaught on the currency. But contrary to all the economic fundamentals and studies that we have made, we understand, we still have that problem. That means there's a flaw. There is a crack in that financial architecture. And we have to deal with it. So to me, Bretton Woods need to be reconsidered. That's why I even proposed. And now growing acceptance, initially some sort of a currency arrangement, multilaterally and bilaterally. I even proposed a possibility to initiate an Asian monetary currency, monetary fund, not necessarily to dismantle, but at least to be able to placate the temporary setbacks that we have, which means, therefore, in trade, in financial architecture, even in the political arrangements, as I referred to the United Nations, there must be preparedness to make adjustments. But more importantly, the ideals must be there. There should not be a contradiction when it comes to what are we here for, if not for justice, for humanity. Can we tolerate, for example, racial discrimination within our countries? Malaysia is a multiracial country. We still have problems we have to grapple with. But do we condone this? We cannot. Now, we cannot condone this because it transgresses a basic principle of humanity and justice. If we can't condone this here, we can't condone it elsewhere. And I made it very clear. So, I mean, I think it's a very pertinent point. That's why we have think tanks like you all. I mean, you should think and reflect on these issues. All right? Thank you.
All right. I think it's fair to go to the right flank now. Sorry. The first hand that has been raised. Sorry. Yeah, so what's your names? I saw your hand first, I think. Grab your chance.
All right, thank you, Dr. Professor Faiz. I'm Adiputra from the Institute for Development Studies, Sabah. So, Dr. Seri, you have displayed skepticism for minilateral arrangements such as the Quad and AUKUS in your speech at the 78th General Assembly for the United Nations last year, calling it fragmentations of power. But Dr. Seri, what about sub-regional and peripheral minilaterals such as BIMPIAGA as not just a vehicle for economic growth, but enhancing better representation at the multilateral ASEAN level? Just want to know your thoughts on this, Dr. Seri.
I think if I reflect on the decisions made by the ASEAN leaders in Jakarta, we made specific reference to that, to improve the mechanism other than the ASEAN leaders, but also sub-regional arrangements. It has not been that effective, but I agree with you, much more needs to be done. And also supporting some bilateral engagement, but backed by ASEAN. For example, Malaysia with Singapore in the economic zone, or Malaysia with Thailand, the North Malaya and the South Thailand economic understanding or zone where we're planning with Prime Minister Seta. I mean, these ideas should also be reflected and discussed within the ASEAN mechanism, because such sub-regional mechanism would be of immense help in terms of dealing with some issues like North Malaya happens to be partly relatively a bit poorer, like Mega, and also South Thailand, it also can be problematic. So the consensus between leaders is like, let's now focus on economic development. Now, I think although it is quite bilateral in a sense, you should probably get North or South Sumatra involved, and similarly in the case with Singapore, Malaysia, Singapore. I share that concern, and I'm sure our friends within ASEAN should take it up seriously.
Okay, time to go back to the center. Well, we have a choice here, perhaps. I think, Dino, you raised your hand much earlier. Thank you.
Prime Minister Dino Jalal from Indonesia, and thank you for your inspiring speech. Do you think that ASEAN has the capacity or some capacity to alter the course of US-China relations? Or do you think that is something beyond our reach and we should just stay out of it? And then another follow-up to that is the UN Secretary General has said that he's worried about the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism around the world after the Gaza war. Malaysia has always been active on Islamic issues around the world. What is your plan to push back on Islamophobia, which seems to be on the rise in many places around the world?
No, I think within Malaysia, it's a relatively smaller country, within ASEAN, we should also exert our influence. And I think our strength to be able to navigate and engage with both, which means not necessarily to be able to resolve the complex situation between China and United States, but at least to impress in the world that there can be a region, vibrant, generally one of the most peaceful, ASEAN, and the most vibrant economically, can take a reasonable stance to engage with both, based on these principles of equity, of justice, and to use this mechanism to uplift the living standards of our own people. I think that is a position that we take. I don't think we can be more ambitious than that to be able to resolve one of the more complex issues in the world. But on the related issue on growing racism or anti-Semitism or now Islamophobia, I think, again, I allude to my earlier response. It is a lack of humanity. I mean, can you imagine? People get more sophisticated, more educated, and then more fanatical and more intolerant and Islamophobic. There's no reason. I used to quote here and popularize the work of Edward Said in his devastating critique of Huntington's Clash of Civilization. What did he say? In a short article in the Atlantic, I think, he said, this is not a clash of civilization, but essentially it's a clash of ignorance. Ignorance. And of course, a display of arrogance. You think you know, you don't know, And you study without empathy. I was in Tokyo on Keio University. I was talking about one of the great sages and thinkers and scholars, Toshihiko Izutsu, from Japan. And we said, you want to understand others, the other religions, other cultures, you must be with empathy. The Islamic principle is to know, respect, and appreciate, not even to tolerate. The differences of tribes, or race, or regions is not to tolerate. The Islamic term is to know, to appreciate the differences. And there's a vast difference here. Of course, you can say, yes, it's true, but it's not necessarily represent the entire Muslim view. Yes, I agree. Because the ignorance doesn't only apply to the West, also to the East. The ignorance doesn't only necessarily apply to the Christians, but also to the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Muslims. So they must be there. But how can you call them ignorance? They have PhDs. They are in the think tanks, not here, I mean outside. So, but actually it's ignorance in the sense of not respecting and knowing the other. They assume they know. You talk to them, they have all the answers in the world. I used to teach at Georgetown. I attend all these think tanks around Washington. I enjoy it immensely. But then when you talk to them, well, they have all the answers of the world. And listening to them, I know many of the answers are wrong, particularly with my country or my people, my region. Arigato.
That happens when the Prime Minister talks about Izutsu. Yes. Over there. Okay, perhaps. Let me see. Sorry, I think it's fair. Sorry. Yes, Professor Ibtisam from the UAE.
Thank you, Dr. Faiz. Thank you, Prime Minister, for a wonderful speech. I'm coming from the Gulf, from UAE. I'm also running a think tank, but knowing the region very well. May I ask, beside the Islam, which we share both, what about the relation of the GCC and ASEAN? Still, except China, the ASEAN is very shy in the region. They are not coming, only they just stand where we have many other aspects of relation, cultural, economic. And this is very important to have that. And in ASEAN, why we don't have that chair for the GCC, which make that more strong relation, make the GCC also, we have the same dilemma, choosing between the West and Asia, but it's also your role to pull more our leg towards Asia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. We had a great meeting last year, hosted by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, attended by all the leaders of GCC and ASEAN. They have given a commitment that next year they will have ASEAN GCC to follow through. And although there is room for improvement, when it reminds me of George Bernard Shaw. He says the room for improvement must be a huge room. That means the capacity to, improve. But it's growing. I mean, they're growing very active from Emirat investments in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Thailand. Mubadala and Mazda was here last week and the last 2 weeks. And the Minister of Trade was here from UAE. And then there is this Balatna from Qatar, very much involved. And Aramco, and Aqua from Saudi, all here. And the region, which is highly welcome. And we do participate in many of the activities, including the projects in the Gulf. But more importantly is, of course, the Gulf, GCC, and work with the region, including China. And we look forward to, again, enhancing this ASEAN GCC with two regions, which has lots of similarities, to also navigate between the East and the West and the superpowers, and to use that opportunity to strengthen our bond, particularly in trade investments, and also culture and technology.
Okay, we still have time for a few more questions. Yes. I think Ibu, you wanted to ask, Ibu Dewi. Yes.
Ya, terima kasih. Ya, Bapak Anwar, my name is Dewi Fortuna Anwar from Indonesia, among others from the Habibie Center. I'd like to come back to the region. You have long been a proponent of constructive engagements or even constructive interventions. In our part of the world, especially, there are gross violations of human rights in our and as you know, we have the ASEAN Charter, and we talk about values like democracy, human rights, rule of law. But as you know, the ASEAN Charter is very weak. It's been diluted from what the wise men, including, Pak Ong, he is one of the wise men, that there's no enforcement mechanism. What do you think about, isn't it time for us to review the ASEAN Charter to strengthen the capacity of ASEAN itself to do more than just call and hope? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, those days when I was in the opposition, I tend to be quite cynical about the whole idea of constructive engagement. I said, there's no constructive engagement because for the 30 years there nothing happens until the EU then decided to be more forceful in Myanmar, then ASEAN went along. So what happened was actually more not constructive engagement, but more construction there. You see, people are using that mechanism and doing, business and trade. I mean, it's fine. But then you must not lose sight for the principle of the 5-point consensus. That is why in the last few years, ASEAN have provided for some sort of more principled stance on the issue of human values, of human rights, because that is important. I mean, you collaborate with one another based on certain basic principles. The form of government, we have to be more, I should say, accommodating. I mean, people then have to navigate. Sometimes you have to accept the transition. But some core values, I agree with you fully. I think the relevance of ASEAN is seen to be, quite committed into a form of democracy or democratic values. But democratic values should come along with democratic accountability, which means we all cherish some principles of judicial independence or relatively free media. I mean, those principles, but at least be also projected. And more importantly, of course, human values, humanity, compassion. We can tolerate differences, but we can't tolerate random killings and marginalization of people or intimidation. I mean, those principles, I think the wise men should also continue to reflect on what they have recommended, I think, and share their views with the leaders in the leaders' retreat, for example, and to principles. Because when our initial leaders crafted the ASEAN sort of a vision, they were not, for example, they didn't craft it in great detail. But generally people do associate with a country that wants to promote growth, remains independent and neutral, and cherish some human principles and human values on the issue of justice or issue of compassion. And I think, to my mind, of course, I have to build up this consensus and speaking to my leaders. I mean, Lawrence Wong is coming next week, and I'm continuing to engage with SETA, and Prabowo was here. So I think we will continue to engage to showcase that ASEAN must grow beyond what we have achieved now, to be more assertive issues, and firstly to protect our turf. I mean, we must set that example. And then, of course, as I referred to just now, at this stage, to move beyond diplomatic discourse into more intra-trade and joint investments to really fortify this unit as a strong political, economic, and cultural entity.
Okay. Okay, I think we have time just for one more question. Yes. The end, who's, I can't see you? Yes.
Prime Minister, sir, I'm Joshua Espena from Pacific Forum, but I'm based in Manila. Here's my question, twin question, sir. Where does Malaysia...
You only have one question,
yes,
please.
Sir.
No three questions.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Where does Malaysia converge and diverge with the Philippines in the latter's concern and current policy stance in the South China Sea? So how will Malaysia use its 2025 ASEAN chairmanship to address the Philippines' feeling of abandonment?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Why do you end with a difficult question? We are doing relatively well. No, both of my colleagues have been engaging with me quite well, expressing their concerns about some skirmishes in the territorial waters between Philippines and China. He also understands our position that as far as Malaysia is concerned, we have not encountered any problem. and I've always urged that there should be more aggressive engagement. And we have also conveyed his concern. Not that we are not sympathetic, we are. But my position has always been that we, ASEAN, among ourselves, and with countries, including with China, we engage with China. There should not be an involvement of other parties because they will be deemed to be more complex and will complicate the matter. But I think at this stage, I would say that I do understand and appreciate the concern expressed by Bongbong Marcos in many of my exchanges with him. But I said, when he asked for my view, I said, my personal view is that we take a more aggressive way of engaging diplomatically, and we have been rather successful in that regard. Because there have been some very serious issues too with Malaysia, but we have been relatively more successful in that regard because we are deemed and seen to be really neutral in the engagement. But we will continue. I think both foreign ministers have extremely good contact and very active engagement, and I think we'll continue to do so. Thank you.
So on that very aspirational and optimistic note, we end our proceedings for this morning, and let's just give us a big round of applause. Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Thank you to the Honorable Prime Minister and Datuk Prof. Faiz for the keynote address session. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the keynote and highlight of the 37th Asia-Pacific Roundtable. ISIS Malaysia and the ASEAN ISIS Network would like to express our profound gratitude to the Honorable Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim for gracing this occasion.